Hello everyone, and welcome to the 11th Domain-Driven Design Barcelona Meetup. This occasion is special because we have with us Jimmy Nilsson. Before giving the floor to him, let me introduce myself, Domain-Driven Design Barcelona, and Jimmy. In summary, the only thing I'd like to tell about me is that I created this meetup so that anyone interested in DDD, no matter the level of experience, can have a place to learn, ask questions, experiment, network, discuss, share knowledge and experiences, and exchange opinions and viewpoints. You can follow our activity on Twitter, YouTube, and Meetup. What's more, I've recently set up the first version of the DDD Barcelona webpage, where you could find the published content from previous meetups. Quite time ago, I was wondering how many domain-driven designers attend their local DDD meetups but have no clue about how many more are out there. To raise awareness regarding this thought, and since I'm a strong believer of connections, opportunities, and collaborations, I've created the DDD Community Map. It gathers all the DDD meetups and conferences from the four corners of the globe. One of its purposes is that someone traveling abroad, either for work or pleasure, could have the chance to join other DDD meetups simply because they know they exist. If you wish to tweet about the meetup, any of these hashtags or profile names may come in handy. Jimmy Nilsson is a business-oriented architect who writes code with more than 30 years of professional experience in software development. He has given presentations, for example, at GoTo, NDC, Skills Matter, Kandinsky, and Domain-Driven Design Europe. He has written numerous technical articles and is the author of the books Applying Domain-Driven Design and Patterns, published in May 2006, which is the second DDD book and the first one with examples in C# and .NET, and .NET Enterprise Design, published in December 2001. He is the co-founder of the Swedish consulting company Factor 10, where he currently works. And Factor 10 arranges the MyConf conference since 2018. At a glance, this is the schedule for today. For the interactive Q&A, write your questions and remarks via the YouTube chat, where I'm keeping an eye to collect and transmit them to Jimmy in the background. At the end of this talk, we'll have more time for Q&A and also to bring in those you submitted when joining the meetup. Feel free to provide feedback at any moment. All right, so far so good. Let's greet Jimmy. Hi Jimmy, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hi Danny, thanks for inviting me.
Initially, we planned the meetup to be held this last Saturday, 11th of April, but due to the current situation with COVID-19, we agreed to move from a personal meetup to an online meetup.
Yeah, you have to be flexible, right?
That's it. So,
Oops.
if you wish to start, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much. So, in this presentation, I'm about to give you here tonight, it's all about what you can do to create success in your projects and in your initiatives, for success for your business and for your client's business, basically. Just a few words. I think Danny already told you that I'm Jimmy and I'm from Sweden. I will try to speak English tonight, but I will actually speak some German and Swedish as well. Let's see how that goes. But let's jump into the presentation. So I've been a consultant for 30 plus years, and I've been collecting a couple of ideas that I think are helpful for, as I said, create successes. But we will start the presentation by having a look at a couple of situations. Hopefully you will recognize some of them a little bit at least. Let's see. So my first observation is when I was about to give a presentation for a bunch of military-grade security experts. They were interested to hear of how we as software developers get started on a new initiative, and especially domain-driven design people. So I told them how I would get started, and I didn't talk for long before they told me they were actually shocked. They thought I was super reckless because I didn't do a full-scale security assessment regarding the information, for example, as a start. That's a must in their opinion. And I was as shocked as they were, because to me that was really hard to do early on, because, well, not a lot was known. We were starting from scratch, basically. So I thought quite a lot about that, and I thought it was like, it's about talking about how thick the door should be before even mentioning a house. Maybe we are about to create a bike or something like that. So that was, yeah, a little bit strange situation, I think. My second observation, in this case, it's a top-level manager going out to town, shopping for, he's after a certain tool. He's about again to start an initiative. Nothing has been decided at all. Nobody has been investigating anything. But he want to buy a workflow package, because that's always needed, kind of. And again, that's again very early on. And actually, in the case that I took this example from, when the business was coming into the project, they didn't understand the need at all for a workflow package. They just wanted to collaborate on being creative on the data. It was nothing about a workflow at all. Third example of an observation. This time I'm going down to the operations people, just to hang out, and I happen to mention an upcoming initiative for them. And one of them becomes really upset with me. And she wonders, why on earth is she the last one to hear about this? And she should actually be first, because she has to order servers and decide on SLAs and protocols and yada yada. And again, I'm very surprised, because I don't have any information at all to give. Nothing has been decided. It's more like a vague idea for some business person, nothing else. And she let me go when I promised her to let her be the first one to hear about everything, so she can take all the decisions. And the fourth example, this time it's a very skilled and experienced project manager coming into a situation, and he works very hard for several months with creating a really large document tree. It looks very professional. But when I later on have a look at that document tree, all the documents are only headers. And well, I understand after a while that those documents are only templates to get some interesting information later on. But 6 months after that was done, nothing was started, no project was decided on, and all those documents are still only templates. So I think all those 4 examples are, well, a little bit of a tip of an iceberg. I think you can come up with more similar examples like this, at least I can. And I'm not trying here to say that developers are any different. I think we are doing similar mistakes. For example, most of us would find it to be really fun to think about the new database solution for making the CAP theorem go away, for example, or swapping UI framework every 3rd month to be on the latest and greatest, or starting out these new initiatives with Kubernetes and Cassandra and really large scale things just in case, so you can deal with Twitter scale later on if that happens, or use that new technology for services so they start in very short time, even in negative time. And we are doing this all the time as well. Get started with our speciality. But I think all those situations are just examples of being wrong in different ways. And focus on your speciality in a vacuum. That's typically, I would say, not the best way of starting. It's a little bit like this. You are running at full speed doing stuff that you are really good at, but you're not actually getting anywhere. It's like focusing on being busy instead of doing business, basically. So what we just saw, I think, are a couple of examples of what I think of as a mindset problem, and we are seeing a gap. We're not really collaborating or having a great situation for togetherness. And I think we need that. When we can actually take care of this friction that we just talked about here, great stuff will happen. So I'm not going to leave those 4 persons you saw before being unhappy. We will end this story with a Hollywood ending. So they will find everything to be nice at the end. You can rest assured there. So we are trying to bridge this gap with a couple of suggestions that I've collected, and I think maybe the first one is the most important of them all, actually. So let's get going. And the first question is what to start with. Let's assume you are in this situation. You have a couple of different alternatives to choose among. Shall you use a boat, an airplane, or a car? Well, it's kind of a silly question because you don't know. Well, it all depends, basically. Are you going on a trip to a relative in a couple of miles away, or are you just walking over to your neighbor for a glass of wine? Or are you going to start living on Mars? That makes a whole an extreme difference, of course. So what to start with is actually quite basic. You have to start with the purpose. That's super important. A couple of years ago, or quite many years ago, when Minecraft was new, my youngest son started started out to using it, and I think it was an early beta version or alpha version that he used, and it was horrible regarding stableness. It crashed all the time, and it was a small kid and didn't enjoy that a lot. And I was actually also a bit upset because I tried to help him out. But then I read on the homepage of Minecraft where the creator of Minecraft, Notch, wrote something like saying, well, the most important thing of a game, it has to be fun. And yeah, he's so right. And I don't understand why I didn't realize that at first. Actually, it crashed too much to be fun, but just a few months later, it all made sense, of course. So, and when you start thinking along those lines of starting with purpose, then you find the situation of, for example, if you work in a company and every day your purpose is trying to cure cancer, then it's less of a worry making $1 extra the next day. That's not the thing that makes you going, because if you find the curing cancer to be something really important to you personally, that will help you to jump out of bed every day and run to work and do your best, and at the evening you will feel fulfilled. And I think that's something we want to have. When you talk about this also, some people always tell you that, well, starting with purpose is just crap. We all have to make money. And this is not about one or the other, I think. I think it's more like start with this and you will make more money, because if you are doing what you really find to be interesting and everybody next to you are running to the same purpose together, new cool stuff will happen and you will actually make more money than you did before. So there is no problem of doing it in this way. Actually, this is much more fulfilling over the long period. Again, making money for the long run. I think I saw a question here. Let me see. So, okay, sorry about that. I failed to have one window on my screen. So, okay. So I think for starting to bridge this gap, I think start with purpose is super important. 30 years ago, when I was young, I had to choose, for being a Swede, I had to choose of doing military services or go to jail. And I was thinking about that for quite some time, actually. And then I decided to do my military services. I had a great life before entering, and I was a bit suspicious that it wouldn't turn out to be super nice. And it was much worse than I could have ever anticipated, actually. All of a sudden, I was away from my programming work, and I had to do everything they told me, and they were screaming at me and spitting at me, and it was just horrible. So I didn't really get it, I have to admit. But a few years ago, I started reading up on military theory. And to my great surprise, I find that 150 years ago, they already knew how to do microservices in a good way. And that was totally amazing for me. So all of a sudden, I understand that my officers, they only wanted me to behave like a really good microservice with my military colleagues. That was what it was all about. And one thing regarding that, from that military theory, is that for doing warfare in a dynamic setting, you want to have autonomous teams for doing certain tasks. But for being able to have autonomous teams, they have to align on purpose. So aligning on purpose gives the possibility for autonomy. Without aligning on purpose, autonomy just becomes crazy quite fast. That's one of the core lessons from that reading, actually. So, how do you get started on this way of thinking? And to my experience, it's actually quite rare that the companies think a lot about this. Maybe you're working at another company where this is actually talked about a lot, but most often it's not, I would say. But I think you can start from the very, from the floor, so to say, and talk to your colleagues all the time about this, and find your purpose, and get it going a little bit like that. But to make a real change in the company, you always have to start this work from the very top. So you have to start with the CEO when you find that it's time for making this to work for the whole company. Okay, let's assume we have this working for us. So we have a little bridge now that we can walk over from different speciality areas. But this bridge it's very weak. When I'm quite heavy nowadays, so when I take a step out here, it might break. And well, we have to do more here to bridge the gap. So let's continue with the second suggestion. And the second question then is, okay, we understand the purpose, but what's the context? Where are we doing our stuff? Now, actually, I think all those 4 situations I talked about, or 5, including the developers, I think all those 5 forgot about context. It was very much about their professionality in their own field. It wasn't what I think is the context. And I believe the context typically is the business. That's where we are doing our work, and we try to do our best for the business and to create and focus on the outcome. If you, as I do, believe that domain-driven design is a really good thing, typically this is not such a big challenge for you, because domain-driven design, well, it's a little bit, it could be called business-driven design, I guess, because the domain is the business. So we kind of have this natural to us. But quite a lot of developers don't see it like this. Instead, they think that, well, I could work anywhere. It doesn't matter as long as I can do cool programming stuff. And the irony, I think, is actually that by not thinking about the business as the context, I believe they become worse programmers. It's actually helping you to become better by thinking about this. Okay, so let's assume we're going out on an adventure. And this is me. I'm not holding a can of beer here. It's a can of, it's a sun blocker. Because when I will tell a certain person that I'm going out on a really cool adventure, I know from the beginning that they will tell me that don't forget your sun blocker. And I think that's probably necessary, especially if you have the skin type I have. Luckily I live in Sweden, so I rarely see no sun. But when I do, I get super red immediately. So this is absolutely necessary, but maybe not the first thing to think about, because this won't take me anywhere. So this is necessary, but not sufficient. Let's focus more on the where will we go and what will we do, and of course we will take care of the sun blocker as well. And this little story here actually means a lot to me regarding business development. Shall we be offensive or defensive? As Danny mentioned in the beginning here, I was supposed to be in Barcelona last weekend, and actually I was planning to go to Camp Nou with my youngest son for a game there. So not just that I don't get a chance to see you in person tonight, I also failed to see that game. But maybe both of those things could be fixed in the future, I hope. Anyway, thinking about soccer, you have the choice, of course, for going for being very offensive or defensive, and I guess you can't just choose one of them. Even Barcelona would lose their games if everybody went for striking the next goal all the time. So you have to mix this. But I think quite often when I work with companies, they have a tendency of being more on the defensive side, I would say. And at least most of the people rather in those companies. And when I talk about defensive business development, I think of things like being compliant and being really careful about risks such as old technology. And again, you shouldn't skip those things, but you should not just close down on all offensive initiatives until you are compliant about everything, because, well, there need to be a balance. Example of offensive examples instead is it's more about growing the market or finding new markets, for example. The first category is more about cost focus, and the second is about revenue focus. So I think of it a little bit like being driven by fear in the first case, and being more driven by excitement or involvement in the second case. So I personally have a strong preference, if I can choose, to mostly work in the second category. It's also the case that when you focus on cutting cost, it's quite often more dangerous than you first think of. When you cut a certain cost, it might not just mean that you save money, you might also cut your revenue without that being your purpose. But that happens all the time. Another thing here is that cutting cost might often be needed, but it can never be lower than zero. It can't be less. But the revenue focus, if you go that route instead, it has no upper limit. You can increase it forever. So they are very different in nature, those two areas. I mentioned early on that those 4 observations were quite a lot about get starting with my activities that I'm really good at. And I do those in my own little department with my colleagues that think the same as me. And that's quite a typical way of organizing a company. So that's the organization situation you can see to the left on my screen now. And I have 3 different departments. Maybe the first department is a marketing department. The second might be construction department. And then it's the development department. And maybe I should have a fourth, which might be the sales department. And finally, there is some outcome going out to the customers. And again, this is quite common way of organizing work. And it's quite nice to hang out with developers if you are a developer. And well, you are friends and you kind of find the friction between those different departments. All the arrows means friction. And they also mean time delays. So when there is an idea coming from marketing going to construction, there's also quite often like a waterfall, not a lot of flow going back. And the marketing department in this example, it's actually quite far away from the client. So they don't get a lot of feedback at all, definitely not all the way from the client. So they kind of live in their little area, isolated area. They also get their own budgets for each department, and well, if we don't spend our money, it might go to another department, and that also drives local optimizations in a bad way. Another way of organizing that is much more optimized for outcome than for activities might be like this. So the idea here is that in each of those gray boxes, you have people from all the different specialities that are needed for creating the outcome. And in this case, you don't have this delay between departments. There is only one, and it can do everything that is needed. And everybody are very close to the client and will get all the feedback at a rapid pace. Very good feedback loop because of that. Quite a lot of developers find the second approach to be quite bad at first. A developer hanging out with the sales guy, that could be really well, not so fun at first. But actually, I think most developers will enjoy it over time, because in my opinion, this typically has a better chance of success. And everybody wants to be part of creating success and creating good outcome for the clients, and seeing how the client enjoy what you have done for them. That's really motivating all the time. This second way of organizing is typically breaking down when someone is having a look at this, maybe with more with the eyes of a CFO, for example. And the CFO noticed that you're having the same skill at two different places. That looks a little bit wasteful, he might say. So then he says, let's take the salespeople and take them out of those business areas or departments and create the sales department instead. And maybe we can get rid of one of them because of doing that. So that person might be, well, a little bit more drawn to the to the first way of organizing. On the other hand, I've asked one CFO who thought in that direction. I asked him, what would you do if you have a crisis situation in your company and something that has to be solved, or the company will go down? And then he told me that actually that's very simple. I just take all the people I need, put them in the room, lock the door, and leave them there, and tell them they will get out when they have solved the problem. So he kind of have it in him. And still, I don't know what happens when he kind of move in the other direction from time to time, because he understands that the best way of quickly getting to the market is actually having a cross-functional department instead. So we talk a lot about gaps here, and one very common gap is between managers and developers. Managers, they have this tendency of thinking quite a lot about money, and developers think a lot about code. And quite a deep gap here. But I don't think this gap is that troublesome, actually. I have a little model here that I'd like to tell you. And as all models, this model is definitely wrong. You can kill it in a second by saying a few words, but it's also helpful. I think it's actually going to help you. So even though you can tear it down, use it instead. And the model goes like this. So when you tell the manager that, well, I'm a developer and I think a lot about code, but I realize that code has a direct connection to money. It's like code is about creating value, and value is measured in money, for example. And you can also say that a piece of code will cost a certain amount of money to maintain. Maybe one line of code will cost €1 to maintain each year. Again, typically developers then will say, well, maybe I should write really long lines of code and, well, tearing down the model. But when the manager hears this model, he or she might, for the first time, think that, is that the reason why the developers are whining all the time about me being sloppy with not thinking about the code? When they tell me to take it easy and let them do it correct and things like that, they are only thinking about our business value. So the managers really think this model is helpful for them. For the first time, they see the connection of how it all fits together. So this model, as simple as it is, it will actually drive in the right direction, because I strongly believe that size matters when it comes to code bases. Because if you have a growing code base, that will typically mean a growing cost for maintaining it over the years. It will also typically mean that you will have more bugs. If you don't have any code at all, you don't have any bugs. If you have a lot of code, you typically have a lot of bugs. This is very intuitive to most people, I would say. It also means that when the code base is growing, your delays will grow. There is more stuff to take care of all the time, to change, and so on. And it won't take that long before someone says, well, we have so much code to take care of, we have to grow the team size now. We need to add headcount here. And now it gets really scary, because when you grow the team size, what always happens then is that the code base will grow even more. And then you are in this vicious circle going down fast. So for some reason, most people haven't read the book Mythical Man Month. It's 30 years old by now. But in that book, Brooks provides a formula for calculating, assuming you are in a late project and you add one developer, how much later will the project be? I think that's super powerful. It tells you immediately that adding people to a project is not without problems. So you should be really careful of doing that, I think. Here's a picture of a code base I worked on a couple of years ago, quite many years ago. And this diagram at first looks a little bit like spaghetti, I guess. But maybe you thought it was a dependency graph for classes. It's actually not. It's a dependency graph for assemblies. Or in Java, the word is package, I think. Dependency graph for packages. So, and then it gets really scary. This is actually it's not around any longer, so you can sleep well at night, because this can keep us awake otherwise. But this piece wasn't created by 3 developers. Of course not. It took quite a lot of people to create it. Well, it did its job. It was really good from the beginning, but over time it just made it was basically impossible to make changes to this piece of code after a couple of years. So I think size matters. So, third suggestion, how to work. And the bridge is becoming stronger. Now we have support for the next step of the bridge here that will come quite soon. So maybe some of you have at one point in time said that I want to speak to the domain expert, but he never has time for me. If you have said that, I hear it quite often, and it always makes me very suspicious. I think it's one of the two different things. Either that the domain expert, either he doesn't care about the result. And if that's the case, you should just leave the project. It's very low chance of creating a success with a domain expert who doesn't care. So that's quite easy. Just leave. But more often, I would say that we as developers, we have a tendency of making the domain experts to find us a bit boring, because we go into their room to talk to them, and after 2 sentences we tell them about repositories and dependency injection and side effect free functions, and it only takes one of those words and they go blank, and all of a sudden they remember they have a very important meeting right now and you have to leave immediately. Next day you will find that their door is locked. They don't want to talk to you. They find you very boring. I think that's actually something we often run into. I have a little story to share. A couple of years ago I went to Kitzbühel for skiing in the spring. It was me and my wife and again my youngest son, and we were standing in the lift queue and lining up next to each other for taking the 4-seater in a couple of minutes. And all of a sudden there is a very small boy skiing up to us and standing next to my wife and leaning to her. And that was a little bit unexpected for us, at least. And a couple of meters away, we hear the ski teacher scream for him, and he screams in German something like "Achtung, Achtung, bleib in der Gruppe." And that small kid, he screams back, cries back to his ski teacher. I don't remember exactly what, and I don't speak German, so I guess I didn't understand it. But especially my wife finds this to be very unnice or weird, and she gets afraid that someone think we are going to kidnap this very small boy. But so she starts trying to push him away, and but he's not leaving. He's very eager to go with us. And so he, after a while, he says to us, "Jag vill åka med er." And that's Swedish, and that means I want to go with you. And as it turns out, he had listened, or by accident, he heard us speak Swedish in the lift queue. And this kid, he spoke many languages, and he spent all his summers in Sweden with his grandfather and grandmother. And he just because us speaking Swedish, he started to like us. And I think that was actually scary how powerful it was. We could easily kidnap this boy. No problem at all for us if we wanted to, just because we shared language. And I think that's exactly the same with your domain expert who doesn't want to speak to you. If you change your language or try hard to change your language the next time you speak to him, and try to a little bit carefully to use his language instead, you will see a dramatic shift. All of a sudden he will lock the door when you are in the room because he wants to hang out with you the whole day. And when you go to the pub, you will find the domain expert hanging out next to you. And he wants to be with you all the time, just because you are sharing language. I think strongly that's working out for you. So the third suggestion of how to work is to focus on language. Again, for domain-driven design people, this is not a big surprise, of course, because ubiquitous language of domain-driven design is one of the core pillars of the concept or of the philosophy of domain-driven design. But I said before that try to speak the language of the domain expert. That's a little bit of a trap also. It's not just about listening and using their language. Instead, together you should try to, in collaboration, make the language better and more crisp, because they are typically quite sloppy on using the same word for different things and different words for the same thing. And that's something developers typically are very here immediately. So by doing this, you are focusing, I think, on understanding your domain expert and your domain better. And that's definitely one of the bottlenecks for creating better software, to understand things. I would say it's rare to find that someone has created something good when he didn't understand what it was all about. It's kind of impossible, I would say. So this is super important, of course. So we have this great building material when we are software developers. I think of software as magic, because we just add a couple of words and all of a sudden the program will do something. And when we change our mind, we just press Control-Z, or we change a word and the software will do something else. It's amazing. Best building material in the world. But in reality, this is what most people think of when they hear of software. This is the law of nature to most people, that the cost of change will over time increase exponentially. So quite fast, a piece of software will be so expensive to change that you will have to rewrite it. That's what happens here. And maybe you think that the next time we will think much harder before we start building or developing the software. Unfortunately, then the curve will be even worse, because then you might try to prevent things, predict what might happen, and then you are in even worse problems. This is how it most often is. I've certainly been involved in projects creating this, not by purpose, of course, but by accident. But I have also been in projects where the curve looks like this. And I think this is of tremendous value to the business, because when you have this curve instead, it means that the business people, they can try out different ideas. They don't just have one chance, they have many chances. They know that the software is in good shape. It can be changed all the time without the cost to go bananas. So this is very, very important to achieve for important software. The question is, how do you achieve this? And I think the answer is that there are very many different ingredients to this. So most of the stuff you are using is probably the right answer here for how to achieve this. So domain-driven design is definitely one of the things, in my opinion. TDD as well. Yeah, all your favorite things. So I talked about ubiquitous language, but if we think this is a good thing, why only speak the ubiquitous language? 25 years ago, Martin P. Ward wrote a paper called Language-Oriented Programming, and I think this is really interesting to think of and try to use. I've been trying this out for over 10 years now, and I have to say it's much trickier than I first thought. But I also see when used correctly in good situations, it can have a dramatic impact, a positive impact. So the idea is that not just talk with the domain experts, create a language that is fitting for them. So if a language that is able, so they can express the business in that language together with you. Maybe you can sit next to each other and do pair programming with the domain expert instead of just your developer colleagues. I think if you haven't had a look at this is a really interesting area that I'm sure you will find interesting. Okay, so having a look at our bridge again, the fourth suggestion is actually making the bridge really strong now. So now we have, after applying this, we have a bridge where we can take a walk over to the other department and talk to them and do great stuff. The fourth suggestion is to use the circle of safety. And I'll show you a couple of different examples of what that might mean. The first example you might have seen when you have been working in a large company or in very old companies, that when you are about to start up a new initiative, it's very common that the whole company will, for some reason, I am not sure which, but they will kind of go against this new initiative because the whole company really likes status quo. So it's like an immune system killing this initiative. So for making the initiative possible to execute, you have to really protect it, to put up high borders around it. It's like being good neighbors, then you need good fences. It's probably some of you might think of the bounded context that, well, I can do whatever I'd like to do within my bounded context. I only have to think about my neighbors when crossing the borders, so to say. And this is kind of like the same idea, taking care of the immune system of the company. But it's even more basic than that, because we as humans, we have been evolving over very many years, and thousands years ago, it was the case that a sound, an unexpected sound, it probably meant that we were in great danger. We were about to be eaten by a lion or something like that. So the humans that were really careful, so to say, when they hear this sound of a leaf, they start running. Those humans were the ones who survived, and that's why our brains are programmed in the same way nowadays. And this will actually mean that even if you have a protected group of people, like in the picture here, that work really well together, that is very fragile. So when you come to the office the next morning and your colleague isn't saying hi to you, we are programmed to think that this is really scary. Is he going to kill me? That's how we react. We can't help it. It's not logical. It's just how we are. Our brains are like that. And maybe we calm down, but we typically think about that for the whole day. And all our energy is going on thinking about, why isn't Peter liking me any longer? And this is, instead of us using that energy for creating outcome. And the next day, and the same thing is repeated, then you're totally sure he will kill you. Then that's just how it is. So the message here is to be really careful of how you are, excuse me, how you are behaving to your colleagues, a little smile will do all the difference in the world, actually. So I have this little communication tip here for you. It says that you should try to express yourself in 4 different dimensions. So instead of going to a meeting with maybe 10 people and all of a sudden start talking very loud to one of your colleagues and tell him that, I see that you're looking at your phone all the time. That typically will, in that meeting, create a bad vibe. People will wonder, what's on earth wrong with Jimmy? He's typically quite nice, and now he's screaming, and nobody will hear you any longer. They will just be thinking about what's going on or what's wrong. But on the other hand, if you use this little tip here and talk to that colleague in 4 different dimensions, you can say something like, I can see that you're looking at your phone all the time. That makes me think that you don't want to be in this project. And then I become very sad because I really want you here. You are definitely needed. And all of a sudden, the same message and same reaction from me is understood way better from the whole room, but especially from that colleague. He's not feeling offended any longer, and we can have a quality discussion instead. So I can't say I do this automatically and all the time, but sometimes when there is a strange effect of a discussion, I remember this and try it out, and it typically works out very well. Because communication is really hard. That's it. We have to try really hard to be understood in the right way. A couple of years ago, I worked at the university, and one day an old student of mine came to me and said that he had solved the problems of outsourcing. And I thought that was, wow, that's really, is that possible? And he said, well, actually, I have one problem left. I've solved everything except the communication problem. And I thought that was hilarious, actually. Isn't that the problem of using it and doing it? That's the tricky thing, I think. So a couple of more thoughts regarding circle of safety. I really like the idea of fail forward, and with that I mean you should feel safe to try out ideas, and if it doesn't work, try another thing, and no, you shouldn't get a lot of blame out of that, or no blame at all, actually. Couple of years ago, I was going to be involved in a project with a large car manufacturer in Sweden. And I went into those, big bosses, and I was very proud to tell them that I might have the world champion record in doing mistakes. And I thought that was a really good thing. They actually hated it. They wanted to kick me out immediately because they never did any mistakes. And that was a strange situation for me as well. Can you really do stuff without doing mistakes? That sounds strange. So I'm not sure that, I don't think that's a good idea, actually. A friend of mine is running a museum called the Museum of Failure. And this is touring the world, and here are a couple of interesting failures. For example, fat-free Pringles. I think most of us would guess that to be a failure before it was even created, but quite fun. I don't even remember it, so maybe that's another thing with failures. Well, it's not fun when it happens, but you don't think of it too long. So actually, I have an idea of I think every company should have a little museum of failures, and not to scare people off. It's more like something to celebrate. There we could see that that person had that and that and that and that failure. Wow, that's amazing. He probably made a success after that, because I think that's how it happened. You to create the success, it takes at least 10 failures or maybe 100, but success will come later on. If you only make one try, you typically will have to think a lot, and you might end up in the analysis paralysis trouble because of that. And you typically also will play safe. Success is not what's going to happen. It's more like, yeah, it wasn't a failure, at least something like that. So no, I think fail forward is the way to move. This could be made easier for people to deal with if you make a clear difference between your lab environment and your delivery environment. Because in the lab, failures are expected. If it's not failing, that might even be weird in the lab. But in the delivery situation, predictability is quite high valued. So there you should have been doing the experiments in the lab and then go into the delivery instead. I think that works out quite nicely. And finally, before going to the last suggestion, 11 years ago, I wrote an article that I called the chunk cloud computing, and I think this might be the worst name for one of my ideas ever. Anyway, the idea was about how to protect teams, or how to protect services from each other for making them to run at full speed when being developed. And I think personally, this is how I think of microservices and how it was created. So microservices is not at all about technology. It's about the circle of safety, in my opinion. So let's see, I have a question. The question says, according to the DDD classification of subdomains, core, supporting, and generic, which ones you'll take the risk to outsource the development? Yeah, that's a great question. I think my immediate response here, maybe I'll have to ask Danny to get a chance to come back to all of you if I come up with a better answer later on. But my spontaneous thought here is that, well, the generic subdomain, I don't think you should do any development there at all. And the supporting, maybe, if you find that will be a good solution. The core, typically, that needs to be developed, because that's where you will want to have your competitive edge, and you want to be different. There will typically not be any standard solutions around for the core subdomain. But if that should be outsourced or not, personally, I think you can outsource that if you find a super good way of doing it. It's not impossible, but quite a lot of companies, they find it to be a good idea to have their core subdomain development to be owned by the company. But I think it's not about DDD if it should be outsourced or not, in my opinion. That was at least my spontaneous answer. Maybe I'll have to come back to that later on. Thank you very much, by the way. So we have this bridge. It's working out for us. We are running around and running over it, and we are meeting and having friction and dealing with it, and great stuff is going on. But the last suggestion is about where to put our focus now when we actually have solved the mindset problem, and we are collaborating. What shall we collaborate on? And my suggestion is that we should solve bottlenecks. And typically, actually this connects to the last question, typically we should focus on the core domain to spend our money and our effort. But before we dive into that a little bit, I just want to mention that also in this area, I think often there is a question of what shall you use automation for and what shall people be used for. And still, I believe this is the case, that people should only be used for creative stuff, innovative stuff, and relationships. They are really good at that. Automation at this point, I believe, is not there yet. Maybe never, I don't know. But well, right now people should be used here. But if you ask the question, which programmer is the fastest in the world? Well, for certain repetitive tasks, no human programmer will beat the program. So automation, I think, should take care of the rest, as this is more like the mindset for going into a situation. Typically, this can be used before you really find the bottlenecks, which we will talk about in a minute. This can take away a lot of fog in the situation, so it's easier to really go in and find the most important things to work on. Okay, so if you are a developer, you have, without realizing it, you have been thinking a lot about where you get the most effect out of an effort. When you do an optimization, for example, in some piece of code, it typically won't help at all to delete comments, for example. You can do that everywhere, and the program runs at the same speed afterwards. But if you instead, in a tight loop, do a small optimization, that might change the performance of the application dramatically. That might be everything that is needed, actually. So developers, I think we have this automatically because we have been training on this for our whole careers, basically. But that's not the same out in the wild, in the business. They quite often might do a mistake like this. So what I'm trying to show here is that I have a bottleneck here. Some flow is coming in from the left and 2 arrows, and some flow is going out to the right. Because there is a bottleneck, the flow is slowing down. That's what I'm trying to show here. But quite a lot of people would find it interesting to invest to get more flow coming in like this. But as you realize, that's not helping at all. You don't get more flow at the right because of this. The only thing that happens is that you build more stock, so to say. You clog the bottle with more, and this just costs money. And it costs money with the extra effort. It costs money with the stock that is building up, and it's not either helping to add more effort to the right here, because there is not more coming out because the bottleneck is making it troublesome. And why on earth is this happening all the time? And I have a couple of common reasons for this. I quite often hear that, well, we do this investment because it affects very many. And that's a nice thing, but it affects a lot of people in your organization, but it doesn't affect your bottom line at all, except for increasing the cost. So when you see it like that, it's really strange. Another comment might be that others are doing it, or, well, they are very loud over there. But all those reasons are, of course, wrong. Because when you're able to finding the global bottleneck and solve it, the effort for doing that might be X, but the effect is at least 10 times X, or 100, or 1,000, or 100,000. The difference here might be several magnitudes. So this is like magic, basically, when you are able to achieve this. If you have read up on this, you might know that Goldrat is the guy here, and he gives one tip very strongly, and that is, don't try this out of resolving a bottleneck without having the top management behind you. Because when you change, or when you take away a bottleneck, maybe you take away the next bottleneck, all of a sudden, the department that you are working in and helping out, they are not a problem any longer. That the bottleneck is now somewhere else, in another department. You can guess what that department will think about you. They will definitely not enjoy being the problem of the company. And in their eyes, you are the problem. You created it for them. So in that situation, you need to have management behind you. Otherwise, everything will just go back to where it were before, because you are not able to resist the situation, I would say. So that, again, it's always important to have top management with you. So another question. Under what circumstances will you apply DDD in a project? Or even better, have you experienced projects in which applying DDD was a step back, or turning it around when you wouldn't apply DDD? Great questions again. Well, I wouldn't apply DDD in a project with developers who hate trying it out and who don't want to learn. That's definitely a situation when it's not going to work, I think. Quite often it's mentioned that if it's a simple situation, skip DDD. I'm not perfectly in harmony with that opinion, because for me, DDD and design is just about thinking, and I always have to think a little bit before doing stuff. So I think if you are a little bit fluent with DDD, I don't think it's overkill actually to think. It's rarely a problem in my personal opinion, at least. But it's more about the people side, I would say, that it's definitely something that people will have to invest to understand. So that's definitely a problem. Again, I'd love to think a little bit more about this and maybe get back to you afterwards. But that's again was my spontaneous answer. So to wrap this up, what really matters, I think my 5 suggestions are the following. Start with the purpose. The business is the context. Focus on language, use the circle of safety, and solve bottlenecks. I think those things really matters. And as I mentioned from the beginning, the sad observations, those people in the beginning were very sad. Now they are actually happy because they are collaborating with you. And who doesn't love to work with a superb security person, or a really skilled project manager and operations expert? And they are just wonderful to be around. But especially when we collaborate, surprisingly, they think the same. They love collaborating with us. And definitely one reason for that is because we are creating great stuff together, and everybody want to do that. So I think we have this Hollywood ending at last. So I have a little dream. I have a dream that we all are working in situations when what we just talked about isn't something strange. It's actually the normal and used to all the time. So I think it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and get going, get to action. So my call to action is try to be your dream. I will definitely try this out. So that was my presentation. I get another question here. It's almost 14 years since the publication of your book in May 2006. After all you have learned since then, would you change, extend, or update your book addressing a particular topic? I guess this is what you may explain in your workshop. Yeah, that's a great question again. Yeah, 14 years is a long time. I guess that's like 2 lifetimes in development, in the development world. So fortunately, I have learned quite a lot since the book. I had, I had an understanding of that time of domain-driven design, and it has definitely evolved. Let's say I will, in the workshop that is mentioned here, it's being executed in May online, and it will, of course, be updated to my current understanding and my current skills in the area. But there is very many different things, I would say. For example, it's a long time since I used ORMs. I'm not doing that automatically any longer, as I did 15 years ago. I think a lot more about the strategic design nowadays, and that's quite a lot in the course also. That was just 2 different examples. On the other hand, there is also quite a lot of stuff that is just more important to me nowadays. For example, TDD. I feel I don't feel I'm clean when I'm not doing TDD, so I still believe in that, for example. Next question. Let's see. I'm reading too slow here. Yeah. What's your opinion in regard to being a bounded context and heuristic for the size of a microservice? It's too simplistic and many more concerns should be considered. Oh, that's a great question. Wow. Then we have to do this again. So yeah, I personally, I think I like that style that is being mentioned here, of starting out with bounded contexts as microservices. That's typically how I start out, but it is too simplistic. And for example, the first concern that occurs to me is that there might be operational reasons for making it smaller, for example. Another thing might be that maybe you are not in a greenfield situation that might affect you. So both of those. I don't think that smaller is automatically better, which is sometimes something you see. Personally, I think that's wrong. So more and smaller is not the way to go. There should be a reason for it, definitely. I think a lot about the organization also when I decide on my borders. And also something to mention here is that I always get these wrong at first. I haven't been able to get it right at the first try. It has to be possible to change. At least for me. Maybe others are doing it correct immediately. Next question. You earlier stated that you see DDD as one of the tools to ensure that the cost of development is not increasing exponentially over time. Could you explain this a bit more in detail, why you think so? Yeah, that's yet another great question. Let's see. To me, domain-driven design is a big toolbox full of different tools that should be used, in my opinion. Especially, very much in this case for not getting a code base that is going out of control. And for example, a code base that nobody understands, when they make a change to that code base, it's typically becoming a big step to a code base that is growing or being more costly. So for the code base to be understandable, it's very important to express the intention with all your code, for example, and there you have the ubiquitous language. But that's just one example. The whole area of domain-driven design is just full of different things that actually address that specific question of yours. So, but I just picked that one. It helps out for making a code base that is more understandable both for the business people and for the developers over time. And just doing that is making a dramatic improvement regarding not getting exponential cost growth over time. Next question, how viable do you find to apply event storming with your clients? Statistically, which is the level of detail of event storming, big picture, process modeling, or software design? You have mostly applied. Do you recall a workshop which have had a big impact? I haven't done a lot of event storming. I'm not an expert on that. I've mostly been doing some experiments on this, but I've only done it in the big picture. I think my experience with it has been that, or the aha moment of it has been that it tears down those borders between people. They might have been fighting for months and months. All of a sudden, with this tool, something happens to the prestige of things, and they get started talking to each other without fighting for the first time in a long, long time. I think for me personally, that's the my biggest effect. Again, this is not my expertise though, so others should be asked about this, I think. But that's my experience and opinion from my tries so far. That said, I'm actually very that what I just mentioned, it's not a small thing, I think. So this is an area which I will personally invest in trying out much more in the future. Oh, a big question. So let's see. Eric Evans describes DDD as an approach to the development of complex systems in which we focus on the core domain, explore models in creative collaboration of domain practitioners and software practitioners, speak a ubiquitous language within an explicitly bounded context. Oh, I love this explanation, by the way. What would you do if any of those 3 points can't be fulfilled? It's still worth it to pursue and apply DDD. Think about the so-called software factories or software consultancies in which the status quo is hard to change. And what really matters to them is to deliver at all costs without looking after quality clients' domains. It's hard to speak with domain experts. That's a situation that has to change. I think I don't know what to do in that situation personally, except trying to change it. Again, please remember that I'm bringing you spontaneous answers here, but my strong feeling here is that I would shy away from that situation. If I can't change it, I would leave. Sorry for not helping out. Do we have more questions, Danny? Oh yeah, okay. For you, the term business has the same meaning as domain. Well, I was a little bit sloppy there, I guess, but I typically think of them that way. But when there could be domains that would be strange to call business. For example, the domain of code editors. Yeah, it is a domain, but I maybe the reason for me is putting saying they are synonyms is that I don't create code editors. I work in the area of business systems all the time. So yeah, maybe I should say excuse me for saying that that's the same thing. I guess I can see your point. Yes.
Well, Jimmy, looks like there are no more questions. I really appreciate your time and your kindness for taking part in DDD Barcelona Meetup. I don't know if you would like to add something.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And well, those questions they were super nice. I just wish we could meet in person the next time and talk some more about those things. But thank you very much all for attending and for asking all those questions. And yeah, please connect if you want to talk in the future. That would be great. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much and hope to see you again, Jimmy.
Same to you. Same to you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
It's almost 14 years since the publication of Applying Domain-Driven Design and Patterns. Now, Jimmy, with the deeper understanding he gained, is instructing the Applying DDD workshop. Just in case you were interested, the next edition of his workshop is taking place at DDD Europe in an online format. Kindly, DDD Europe is providing an exclusive 15% discount for the DDD Barcelona community for almost all online workshops. I'd like to show our 6 friends and supporters. You can find out about them in this meetup page, description, or visiting the homepage of DDD Barcelona. I hope each of us has found this meetup valuable with some insights and as a result enriched our understanding of DDD with Jimmy's presence. Thanks a lot for joining us. Goodbye.